Hello everybody, I'm here today to do a review of When We Cease to Understand the World by Benjamin Labatut. And I read this in the original Spanish, so I don't know who the translator is. But in Spanish the title is Un verdad terrible, which translates to a terrible greenness. And that refers to certain parts of the book actually, both of the titles. And this is sort of not exactly a collection of essays, but it blurs the limit between fiction and non-fiction. It reminded me in that sense a little bit to HHHH. If you have read that, that was about the author trying to follow the steps of a Nazi officer, and this book follows different scientists throughout history, mostly focused on white men on the 19th, 20th century. But yeah, it's divided in 4 parts. So the first part is the one with the most scientists, and there are a lot of chemists in that section. And then the second section focuses more on physicists, and then the third section is more about mathematicians, and then the fourth section is a little bit of everything. Let's say it's a bit of things, a mix of things. But basically, this book, at least to me, it explores the idea of what science does to the people that study the science. And when I say science, there's 2 kinds of science to me: the incremental, let's understand things a little bit better kind of science, and the completely revolutionary kind of science, like the theory of relativity or quantum physics or computation and computers, or when they came up with the periodic table, that kind of completely mind-changing science. This is what the book focuses about. There's some incremental science, but most of it focuses on that kind of science that changes completely the perception of the world. And I guess it focuses on scientists in the 19th, 20th century, mostly because those are the scientists we know about, because it doesn't focus on the science themselves, it focuses more on the scientists. For example, it talks about Haber from the Haber-Bosch process, which it's a new way to create fertilizers and basically take nitrogen from the air and put it in a more solid form. And as I said, it often is used for fertilizers, but it's also used for bombs. Nuclear energy is another example that it explores. Also some other mathematical crazy advances that I do not understand that much, because I'm not that versed into the mathematical theories and proofs and all of that, but that kind of big changes. And it focuses on what that does to the scientists. So as I said, for example, Haber seemed to be okay with the way that his science was used, but then there's also Turing. Alan Turing was a British scientist that decoded a lot of the Second World War messages from the Nazis, and he used what is often considered one of the first computers to do that. He built one of the first computers, and he was a genius, obviously, but he was also gay, so he went into a process of issues with the government, and eventually he was found dead. We don't know if he committed suicide or if he was killed by the British government. But yeah, that's another thing that happened to a scientist. There was also talk about a mathematician that came out with such a incredibly new way to understand the world that he separated himself completely from mathematics. He wanted all his studies to be burned down, and he retired as a hermit into the mountains, trying to live this completely wasteless kind of life. So yeah, there are a lot of examples of different scientists and the different things that that happen to them because of their science. Because, of course, like we as normal citizens, we just go through our life making a really big set of assumptions. But when a scientist finds something that changes the view of the world that much, it is often not accepted in the community. It is also not easy to handle personally how much that does to you. And then also sometimes you do something thinking that is going to be a good thing, and then it's used for war and for killing, and that also goes into the morality of science. So is it the scientists that are responsible to create nuclear energy, or is it the engineers and the military that made the nuclear bomb the responsible people for that? That kind of this debate is also in this book, and of course there are scientists that are okay with how it turns out, and some of them are not, and that's one of the significance of the title in Spanish. A terrible greenness refers to well, several poisons that are green and how they kill people, but also, as I mentioned, Haber created a process in which you could take nitrogen from the atmosphere and make it into something more solid, and he did that for fertilizer, but it was used also for the first massive destruction bombs. And at the end of his life, when he was regretting the things, certain things in his life about this process, he didn't regret that this process was used to make bombs and kill thousands and thousands of people, but he regretted that he was afraid that because he made it so easy for plants to grow, that plants were going to take um, over the world in this terrible greenness. So yeah, and then the English title refers to the last part, and that's also back to the themes of the book. When we cease to understand the world, it's like when we have made discoveries so different that shake our view of the world so much that we don't know how to live anymore in that world. So yeah, those are a bit of the themes of the book. It's a little bit difficult to talk about it because it's not one story. It's just a lot of small stories that connect into each other in some ways, and the themes are the same, but they are just kind of different stories and different essays. Personally, my favorite was the part of the mathematics because it focused more basically on only two mathematicians. And again, mathematics is not a science technically because they don't use the scientific method, they just use logic to develop their theorems. But regardless, it's kind of the same thing, right? And yeah, this one focused only on two people, so it was a lot easier to follow as a story. And also many of these people are people that I have heard about in certain things, like Heisenberg I have heard about, of course Einstein or Haber, on the Solvay conference, things like that I have heard of. But mathematics, again, because it's not my field, I had not heard of these scientists and I didn't know that these things happen, and I found it really interesting to read about these mathematicians and what mathematics can do to your brain as well. So yeah, for me that was my favorite part. And also I cannot comment on the writing style of the translation, but on the original one, I have to say there were a few spots in the book that there were like some sort of spelling mistakes or misuse of words or prepositions, and I don't know if that is because the author is Chilean and Chilean Spanish is slightly different from Spanish from Spain. But yeah, I found some sentences were kind of awkwardly made. And probably it's fixed in the translation, but for me that was a bit jarring at points. But other than that, there are other parts in the book that is quite poetic and quite beautiful. But yeah, I couldn't get past to these small mistakes that, at least I perceive them as mistakes in the writing. I just found them a bit disturbing that they were still there in a finished copy and there were misspelled words. So yeah, that was a bit weird for me, but I think that overall the writing style was fine. And again, I have not heard anyone that read the English translation complain about the writing style, so I think that the English translation is probably fine. So yeah, overall, I quite like this book. I love the themes that it was exploring and the points that it was trying to make. But I think that at points I felt like there were too many scientists that it was trying to tackle. I think that it was also a bit narrow, that only, mostly white males were chosen as scientists. I understand that they are the most famous ones, but I think others could have been researched as well. Um, and yeah, I think that the themes were quite interesting, but again, I found that maybe it was a little bit scattered at points, and the writing style for me, it was a little bit jarring at times. So even though I liked it, it's still not my favorite of the International Booker. But yeah, I would recommend you read it. I think it's quite an interesting, different book that many people can enjoy, especially if you like science. So yeah, that's my review. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you have read it or plan to read this book. And until next video, bye!